12-year-old Alex walked through the back entrance of the Royal Music Academy every afternoon at exactly 3:30 p.m. While other kids his age were playing video games or hanging out with friends, Alex carried a worn-out backpack and followed his mother through the staff corridors of one of the city's most expensive music schools. His mother, Maria, had been working as a cleaner at the academy for 3 years now. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work, and in a world where bills kept piling up faster than paychecks came in, steady meant everything. Alex never complained about spending his after-school hours in the marble hallways of the academy. In fact, he looked forward to it. The Royal Music Academy wasn't just any school. This was where the children of doctors, lawyers, and business owners came to learn piano, violin, and classical singing. The building itself looked like a palace, with tall ceilings painted in gold and cream colors, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, and floors so shiny you could see your reflection perfectly. Alex's job was simple: empty the trash, cans, sweep the practice rooms, and stay out of everyone's way. The students barely noticed him. He was just the cleaner's kid, invisible like the furniture. They walked past him in their pressed uniforms, carrying expensive instrument cases, talking about their weekend trips to Paris or their summer homes by the lake. But Alex noticed everything about them. He noticed how young Sophie held her violin. Bow! The way she moved her fingers along the strings to create those beautiful, sad melodies that made his chest feel tight. He watched 10-year-old David play the piano with such speed that his fingers looked like they were dancing across the keys. He saw how the older students, the teenagers who'd been here for years, could make their instruments sing in ways that gave him goosebumps. Most of all, Alex was fascinated by the grand piano in the main concert hall. It was a Steinway Model D, though Alex didn't know its fancy name back then. To him, it was simply the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The piano was massive, black and shiny like a sleeping panther. When the afternoon sun came through the tall windows, it made the piano's surface glow like it was made of liquid midnight. Alex had never touched a piano key in his life. At home, they had a small TV, a worn-out couch, and a kitchen table where he did his homework. Musical instruments were luxury items that existed in a different world from theirs. But every day, as he swept around that piano, Alex felt drawn to it like metal to a magnet. The director of the academy was a man named Professor Hoffman. He was tall and thin, with gray hair always combed back perfectly and glasses that made his eyes look stern and cold. Professor Hoffman had been teaching music for over 30 years. He came from a family of musicians. His father was a famous conductor, his mother was an opera singer, and his grandfather had performed for kings and queens in Europe. To Professor Hoffman, music was in the blood. You either had it or you didn't, and if you had it, you needed proper training, expensive lessons, and years of practice to bring it out. He believed poor kids like Alex were wasting their time dreaming about music. They should focus on practical things, like getting good grades so they could find stable jobs when they grew up. Alex first heard Professor Hoffman play piano on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October. He was supposed to be cleaning the practice rooms, but the sound coming from the main hall was so incredible that he couldn't help but peek inside. Professor Hoffman sat at the grand piano, playing a piece that made Alex's heart race and his eyes water at the same time. The music told a story without words. It spoke of longing, of dreams that seemed impossible, of beauty that existed beyond everyday life. Alex pressed his face against the small window in the door, watching Professor Hoffman's fingers move across the keys like they were painting invisible pictures in the air. From that day forward, Alex made sure to time his cleaning, schedule around piano practice sessions. He became an expert at silent observation, learning to move like a ghost through the hallways so he could listen without being caught. He discovered that different students played the same pieces in completely different ways. Some played with technical perfection but no emotion. Others played with passion but made small mistakes. The best ones, the ones who made Alex hold his breath, played with both skill and feeling. Alex started noticing patterns in the music. He could tell when someone was playing Mozart versus Chopin just by the way the melodies moved. He learned to recognize when a student was nervous during their lesson because their playing would become stiff and careful. He could hear the difference between someone who loved what they were playing and someone who was just going through the motions. But Alex kept all of this to himself. Who would believe that a cleaning lady's son could understand classical music? Who would care about what he thought or felt when he heard those beautiful sounds? His mother, Maria, worked long hours, often staying late to deep clean the practice rooms or polish the instruments. She was proud of her work and did everything perfectly, but Alex could see how tired she was by the end of each day. Her hands were rough from cleaning chemicals, and she often came home with aches in her back and shoulders. "Education is important, mijo," she would tell Alex while they ate dinner together at their small kitchen table. "Study hard, get good grades, and you can have a better life than this." Alex nodded and promised to focus on his schoolwork, but his mind always drifted back to the music. He found himself humming melodies he'd heard at the academy while walking to school or doing his homework. Sometimes he would tap out rhythms on his desk, trying to recreate the piano pieces that had moved him most. The other students at Alex's regular school thought he was weird. They didn't understand why he was always humming classical music instead of listening to pop songs like everyone else. They made fun of the way he would sometimes move his fingers in the air as if he was playing an invisible piano. But Alex didn't care. He had discovered something magical, something that made him feel alive in a way that nothing else did. Even if he could never afford lessons or own a piano, even if he was destined to always be on the outside looking in, Alex felt grateful just to be near such incredible music every day. Winter arrived early that year, and the Academy began preparing for their annual showcase concert. This was the biggest event of the year, where the most talented students performed for parents, donors, and important people from the music world. Alex watched as the excitement built throughout the school. Students practiced longer hours, teachers became more intense, and everyone talked about who would be chosen for solo performances. Alex knew he would never be part of something like that, but he didn't feel bitter about it. He had his own special relationship with the music, his own way of experiencing its magic. Every afternoon, as he quietly swept the floors and emptied the trash, Alex felt like he was part of something beautiful and important. He had no idea that everything was about to change. The day that changed Alex's life forever started like any other Friday evening in March. His mother had finished her regular cleaning duties, but Professor Hoffman had asked her to stay late to prepare the concert hall for a weekend rehearsal. Alex sat in the back row of the empty auditorium, supposedly doing his math homework, but his eyes kept drifting to the magnificent grand piano on stage. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, creating golden rectangles of light across the polished floor. The entire building felt different when it was empty like this. Without the constant chatter of students and the sounds of practice sessions coming from every room, the academy felt peaceful, almost magical. Alex's mother worked quietly, dusting the chairs and polishing the brass fixtures. She moved efficiently, the way someone does when they've done the same job hundreds of times before. Every few minutes, she would glance back at Alex to make sure he was staying focused on his homework. But Alex couldn't concentrate on fractions and word problems. Not when that beautiful piano was sitting there, silent and waiting. Over the past months, he had listened to so many students play that same instrument. He had memorized the way their fingers moved, the way they positioned their hands, the way they used the pedals to make the sound richer and fuller. In his mind, Alex could hear the music as clearly as if someone was actually playing. He knew exactly how Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major was supposed to sound. He had heard it played dozens of times by different students, and each time he had imagined what it would feel like to create those beautiful, flowing melodies himself, almost. Without realizing what he was doing, Alex closed his math book and stood up. His feet carried him down the aisle toward the stage, as if the piano was calling to him. His heart pounded in his chest, but he felt strangely calm at the same time. The piano bench was exactly the right height when he sat down. Alex had never sat at a piano before, but somehow it felt natural, like coming home after a long journey. He lifted his hands and positioned them over the keys, remembering everything he had observed during those months of secret watching. His fingers hovered just above the ivory keys. He could feel the smoothness of their surface without even touching them. This was the moment he had dreamed about for so long, but never thought would actually happen. Alex pressed down on middle C with his right index finger. The single note rang out clear and pure in the empty concert hall. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever created in his life. Encouraged, he pressed a few more keys, listening to how each note sounded different, how they could blend together, to create harmony or stand alone to create melody. Then, without really thinking about it, Alex began to play the opening measures of the Chopin Nocturne. His fingers found the right keys, as if they had always known where to go. The melody flowed from the piano, soft and gentle at first, then growing stronger and more confident. He was so lost in the music that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through, the music like a knife. Alex's hands froze on the keys, and he spun around to see Professor Hoffman standing at the edge of the stage. The professor's face was red with anger, his eyes blazing behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Alex's mother appeared behind Professor Hoffman, her face pale with worry. "Alex, get away from there right now," she said, her voice shaking. But Alex couldn't move. He sat frozen on the piano bench, his hands still resting on the keys, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Professor Hoffman stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over the boy. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? This instrument is worth more than your family makes in 5 years. These keys have been touched by some of the greatest musicians in the world, and you think you can just walk up here and bang on it like it's a toy?" I wasn't banging on it," Alex said quietly, finding his voice. "I was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." Professor Hoffman let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the empty hall. "Playing? You call that playing? Child, do you know how long it takes to learn to properly play a piece like that? Do you know how many years of training, how many thousands of dollars in lessons, how much natural talent is required?" Alex's mother stepped forward, wringing her hands nervously. "Professor, I'm so sorry. He didn't mean any harm." "Alex, apologize right now and come away from there." But something in Alex refused to back down. Maybe it was the way the professor was talking to him, like he was nothing, like he could never amount to anything. Maybe it was the months of beautiful music he had absorbed, the melodies that lived in his heart and soul. Or maybe it was simply the feeling of sitting at that piano, of finally touching those keys he had dreamed about for so long. "I do know that piece," Alex said, his voice growing stronger. "I've listened to it being played at least 50 times. I know every note, every phrase, every emotion it's supposed to express." Professor Hoffman's eyes narrowed. "You know it? You think watching from the sidelines makes you a musician? These students have been training since they were 4 years old. Their parents invest fortunes in their education. They practice 4 hours a day, every day. They study music theory, technique, performance skills." More people were arriving now. A few advanced students who had come back for evening practice sessions were gathering in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Alex could see them whispering to each other, some of them smirking at the scene unfolding on stage. Professor Hoffman seemed to enjoy having an audience. His voice grew louder, more theatrical. "You want to know something, boy? I've been teaching music for over 30 years. I can tell within the first 5 minutes of hearing someone play whether they have real talent or whether they're wasting everyone's time. Music isn't something you can learn by watching from the shadows. It's an art form that requires breeding, education, and natural gifts that are incredibly rare." The professor began pacing back and forth in front of the piano, warming up to his speech. These students here, they come from musical families. Their parents understand the sacrifices required. They invest in quality instruments, private tutors, masterclasses with world-renowned teachers. That's what it takes to create real musicians. Alex felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment, but also with something else. Anger. He thought about all those afternoons he had spent listening, learning, feeling the music in ways that went deeper than technique or theory. He thought about the nights he had gone to sleep with melodies running through his head, the mornings he had woken up humming pieces he had heard the day before. Music doesn't care about money, Alex said, surprising himself with his boldness. It doesn't care where you come from or what your parents do for a living. Music is about feeling, about expression, about connecting with something beautiful and true. Professor Hoffman stopped pacing and stared at Alex with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Is that so? Well then, young philosopher, let me make you a proposition. The professor's voice took on a mocking tone that made the gathered students giggle. Since you seem so confident in your abilities, since you believe that music is just about feeling and expression, I'll give you a chance to prove it. Alex's mother tried to interrupt. Professor, please, there's no need for... But Professor Hoffman held up his hand to silence her. No, let the boy have his moment. Here's my offer, young man. If you can truly play that piece you claim to, know so well, if you can sit at this piano and produce something that actually resembles music, then I will bow down right here on this stage in front of all my students. The professor's smile was cold and confident. But when you fail, when you embarrass yourself trying to play music that's far beyond your capabilities, then you and your mother will find employment elsewhere. This academy has no place for dreamers who don't understand their limitations. The hall fell completely silent. Alex could hear his own breathing, could feel the weight of every eye in the room focused on him. His mother looked terrified, probably thinking about losing the job they desperately needed. The students were whispering excitedly, anticipating the entertainment of watching someone fail spectacularly. But Alex felt something else entirely. For the first time in his life, he had been challenged to prove that his dreams meant something. Someone was actually asking him to show what he could do, even if they expected him to fail. He turned back to face the piano keys, his hands trembling slightly, but his resolve growing stronger. All those months of listening, learning, and longing had led to this single moment. Everything that happened next would determine not just his own future, but his mother's livelihood as well. The golden afternoon light still streamed through the windows, illuminating the piano keys like they were made of precious ivory. Alex took a deep breath and positioned his hands over the keyboard. This was it. This was his one chance to prove that music truly didn't care where you came from. Alex's hands trembled as he positioned them over the piano keys. The concert hall had never felt so quiet, so tense. He could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears, could feel the weight of every person's eyes watching him from the audience. His mother stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Professor Hoffman crossed his arms and waited, that cold smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. More students had gathered now. Word was spreading quickly through the academy that something unusual was happening in the main hall. Teenagers, who had been practicing in other rooms, abandoned their instruments to see what the commotion was about. They crowded in the doorway, some sitting on the floor, others standing on their tiptoes to get a better view. Alex closed his eyes for a moment and tried to block out everything except the music he could hear in his mind. He thought about all those afternoons when he had listened to this same piece being played by different students. He remembered how each version had sounded slightly different, how some had been technically perfect but emotionally empty, while others had small mistakes but overflowed with feeling. In his memory, he could hear the way the piece was supposed to flow. The opening notes should be soft and gentle, like a whispered secret. Then the melody would grow, becoming more complex, more passionate, telling a story of longing and beauty that went beyond words. He had never played it himself, but he had lived with this music for months. It was part of him now. Alex took a deep breath and pressed down on the first key. The note that came out was perfect, clear, pure, and exactly the right volume. Encouraged, he continued with the opening phrase. His left hand found the bass notes while his right hand carried the melody. The sound that filled the concert hall was nothing like the tentative, clumsy playing everyone expected from a 12-year-old boy with no formal training. Instead, something magical was happening. Alex's fingers moved across the keys with a naturalness. That seemed impossible. He had watched so carefully, listened so intently, that his hands seemed to know exactly where to go. But more than that, he was playing with an emotion and understanding that surprised even himself. The music flowed from the piano like water from a spring. Each note was placed perfectly, not because Alex had memorized the technical requirements, but because he felt where each sound should go. His left hand provided a gentle rolling accompaniment, while his right hand sang the beautiful melody that had captured his imagination months ago. Professor Hoffman's confident smile began to fade. He had expected the boy to stumble through a few bars before giving up in embarrassment. Instead, he was hearing playing that was not only technically competent, but genuinely moving. The professor found himself leaning forward, listening more intently, despite his determination to dismiss whatever the boy might produce. The students in the audience had gone completely silent. Many of them had struggled with this same piece during their own lessons. They knew how difficult it was, how many hours of practice it required to play it smoothly. Yet here was this kid, the janitor's son they barely noticed, playing it with a beauty and expressiveness that some of them had never achieved. Alex was lost in the music now. His eyes were closed, and his whole body swayed gently with the rhythm. He wasn't just playing the notes. He was living inside the melody, feeling every rise and fall of the musical phrases. His hands moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence, and the sound grew richer and more complex. As the piece moved into its more challenging middle section, Alex's playing became even more remarkable. His fingers navigated the faster passages with surprising agility, but he never sacrificed emotion for technical display. Every note seemed to have meaning. Every phrase told part of a larger story. His mother pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had no musical training, couldn't tell a good performance from a bad one, but she could feel the power of what her son was creating. She could see the faces of everyone in the room, see how they were being moved by something beautiful and unexpected. The advanced students were looking at each other in amazement. Lily, a 15-year-old who had been playing piano for 10 years, whispered to her friend, "He's playing better than half our class. Where did he learn to do that?" David, a prodigy who had won several young musician competitions, shook his head, in disbelief. "He's not just playing the notes. He understands the music. Listen to how he shapes the phrases, how he uses the pedal. That's not something you can fake." But it wasn't just the technical skill that was shocking everyone. There was something in Alex's playing that went deeper than training or practice. He was communicating something real, something that came from his heart. The music spoke of dreams that seemed impossible, of beauty that existed in unexpected places, of hope that refused to be crushed by circumstances. Professor Hoffman stood, frozen, his arms no longer crossed, his expression no longer confident. In his 30 years of teaching, he had heard this piece played hundreds of times. He had heard it performed by students who had studied at the best conservatories in Europe, by young people whose parents had spent fortunes on their musical education. But he had rarely heard it played with such genuine feeling, such natural, musical instinct. As Alex moved into the piece's most beautiful section, where the melody soars above gentle arpeggios, something even more surprising happened. He began to add his own subtle interpretations, small changes in timing and dynamics that weren't written in the sheet music but felt absolutely right. These weren't mistakes or signs of amateur playing. They were the choices of someone who truly understood the emotional content of the music. The concert hall's acoustics made every note ring with perfect clarity. The late afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows, seemed to dance with the music, creating an atmosphere that felt almost magical. Students who had come expecting to witness an embarrassing failure found themselves holding their breath, afraid to break the spell that Alex was weaving. As the piece approached its climax, Alex's playing became even more expressive. His whole body was involved now, not in the exaggerated way of someone showing off, but in the natural way of someone who was completely connected to the music he was creating. His shoulders moved with the phrases, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the harmonies, his feet worked the pedals with an instinct that seemed to come from nowhere. Professor Hoffman felt his world view beginning to crack. Everything he believed about music, about talent, about who deserved to sit at a piano like this, was being challenged by what he was hearing. This wasn't supposed to be possible. A poor kid with no training shouldn't be able to play with such sophistication, such depth of understanding. Yet the evidence was right there, filling the room with its undeniable beauty. The students were completely mesmerized now. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected gift they were witnessing. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were hearing. All of them understood that they were experiencing something rare and special, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Alex's mother watched her son with wonder and pride she had never felt before. She saw how peaceful he looked, how right he seemed sitting at that piano. For the first time, she understood that her son's fascination with the academy wasn't just a childish interest. This was who he really was, who he was meant to be. As the final phrases of the nocturne began to unfold, Alex played with even more tenderness and beauty. The melody seemed to float in the air, each note perfectly placed, the overall effect heartbreakingly lovely. He had taken everyone on a journey through the landscape of human emotion, using only black and white keys and the incredible instrument that had called to him for so many months. The last notes hung in the air like dewdrops, pure and crystalline, and perfect. Alex lifted his hands from the keys and opened his eyes, suddenly aware again of where he was, of the silence that surrounded him, of the dozens of faces staring at him in complete amazement. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed, nobody spoke. The spell of the music still hung over the room like morning mist. The silence that followed Alex's performance felt like it lasted forever. The last notes of Chopin's Nocturne still seemed to float in the air, invisible but somehow still present in the hearts of everyone who had heard them. Alex sat at the piano bench, his hands resting gently on his knees, looking around at the faces staring back at him. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, came the sound of slow clapping. It was Lily, the 15-year-old advanced student who had whispered her amazement during the performance. Her applause was soft at first, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure it was appropriate to break the magical silence. But within seconds, the entire room erupted. Students who had come expecting to watch a humiliating failure were now clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Alex's mother was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her chest. She had always known her son was special, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Watching him at that piano, seeing the peace and joy on his face as he played, she finally understood what music meant to him. This wasn't just a hobby or a passing interest. This was his calling, but everyone's eyes were on Professor Hoffman. The stern, proud director stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been wonder. For 30 years, he had believed that musical talent was something you inherited. something that required expensive training and years of formal education to develop. Everything he had just heard challenged those beliefs completely. The professor looked at Alex, then at the piano, then back at Alex again. His mouth opened as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. The confident, mocking smile was completely gone from his face. Instead, he looked like a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been turned upside down. "Professor?" asked David, one of the advanced students. "Are you okay?" Professor Hoffman blinked, seeming to come back to himself. He looked around at all the faces watching him, waiting to see what he would do. Everyone remembered his challenge, his promise to bow down if Alex could truly play the piano. Slowly, very slowly, Professor Hoffman walked toward the stage. Each step seemed to take enormous effort, as if he was fighting against everything he had believed for his entire career. When he reached the piano, he stopped directly in front of Alex and looked down at the boy who had just shattered his assumptions about music and talent. "Where?" The professor's voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Alex looked up at him, still somewhat dazed from the intensity of his performance. "I learned by listening, sir, by watching the students during their lessons. I've been coming here with my mother every day for months, and I just absorbed it somehow." Professor Hoffman shook his head slowly. "But the technique, the interpretation, the musical understanding, those aren't things you can learn just by watching." "Maybe not," Alex said quietly, "but I felt the music. Every time I heard that piece, I could feel what it was supposed to express. When I finally touched the keys, it was like the piano was speaking the feelings I already had inside me." The professor stared at Alex for another long moment. Then, to the amazement of everyone in the room, Professor Hoffman began to lower himself into a deep, formal bow. His pride, his dignity, his 30 years of rigid beliefs about musical education, none of that mattered now. He had made a promise, and more importantly, he had witnessed something that deserved respect. The students gasped. Many of them had never seen their stern director show humility to anyone, let alone to a 12-year-old boy whose mother cleaned their school. When Professor Hoffman straightened up, there were tears in his eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Alex," he said, and it was the first time he had used the boy's name, "I owe you an apology. I have spent my career believing that music was the privilege of a chosen few, that talent without proper breeding and expensive training was worthless. You have just shown me how wrong I was." He turned to address the gathered students, his voice stronger now but filled with emotion. "What we have just witnessed is a reminder that true musical gift doesn't care about money or social class or family background. It lives in the heart and soul, and when it finds its voice, it can move mountains." Alex's mother stepped forward, still wiping tears from her cheeks. "Professor, we never meant to cause any trouble. Alex was just drawn to the music, and I couldn't—" Professor Hoffman held up his hand to stop her. "Maria, your son has just given all of us a gift. He has reminded me why I became a music teacher in the first place. Not to preserve tradition for tradition's sake, but to nurture genuine talent wherever it appears." He looked back at Alex, who was still sitting at the piano bench, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. "Tell me, Alex, would you like to learn more? Would you like to study piano properly?" Alex's eyes widened. "But sir, we can't afford lessons. We can barely—" "You won't need to afford anything," Professor Hoffman interrupted. "I want to offer you a full scholarship to the academy. Lessons, practice time, everything you need to develop your gift." The room erupted in excited whispers and gasps of surprise. Alex looked at his mother, then back at the professor, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "But there's one condition," Professor Hoffman continued with a gentle smile. "You have to promise me that you'll never Lose that natural musical instinct you just displayed. I can teach you technique, theory, and performance skills, but what you have inside you, that connection to the heart of music, that's something no teacher can give you. You must promise to hold on to that." Alex nodded eagerly, tears now streaming down his own face. "I promise, Professor, I promise." Over the following weeks, word of Alex's incredible performance spread throughout the music community. Other teachers came to hear him play, music journalists wrote articles about the miracle at the academy, and video recordings of his performances began circulating online. But Alex remained remarkably unchanged by all the attention. He practiced diligently with Professor Hoffman, learning proper technique and music theory, but he never lost the emotional honesty that had made his first performance so remarkable. If anything, the formal training seemed to enhance his natural gifts rather than diminish them. His mother was promoted to facilities coordinator with a significant increase in pay and respect from everyone at the academy. She watched with pride as her son flourished in an environment where his talents were not only recognized but celebrated. Professor Hoffman became Alex's most dedicated supporter and eventually one of his closest friends. The stern, tradition-bound director discovered that having his beliefs challenged had actually made him a better teacher. He began looking for talent in unexpected places, offering opportunities to students who showed musical promise regardless of their family background. The other students, initially shocked by Alex's sudden rise, soon accepted him as one of their own. His genuine humility and continued enthusiasm for learning made it impossible not to like him. Many of them found that Alex's presence actually improved their own playing, as his natural expressiveness reminded them why they had fallen in love with music in the first place. Years later, when Alex performed in concert halls around the world, he would often tell the story of that Friday evening when his life changed forever. He spoke about the power of believing in yourself, even when others doubted you, about the importance of following your heart, even when it seemed impossible. But most of all, he talked about how music belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford expensive lessons or come from musical families, but anyone who feels its call and is willing to answer with their whole heart. The grand piano where it all began still sits in the Academy's concert hall, and sometimes, when the building is quiet and empty, you can almost hear the echo of those first magical notes that proved dreams could become reality.